This bowl of soup has two ingredients that should never have met. One grew for thousands of years in the high Andes of South America, cultivated by the Inca Empire at altitudes where almost nothing else could survive. The other grew in the wet, windswept hills of northern Portugal, tough enough to survive frost when everything else had died. Neither ingredient knew the other existed, and then, because of Portuguese ships, world trade routes, and the hunger of peasants who had nothing left to lose, they met in a clay pot, in a cold kitchen in the Minho region, sometime in the 17th or 18th century. The result is called Caldo Verde, and it is one of the most quietly extraordinary stories in the history of food. To understand Caldo Verde, you have to go to the Minho, the green, rainy, rugged northwest corner of Portugal. Even today, it is breathtaking. In the 15th and 16th centuries, it was also brutal. Unlike the vast estates of the south, Minho was a land of minifúndios, plots of land so small they had been divided and subdivided across generations until many families farmed barely enough to survive. There was no room for cattle, no space for wheat fields, and on top of the land's limitations came the crushing weight of feudal rents and church tithes that took a massive portion of everything grown before it ever reached the farmer's table. When winter arrived, and in Minho, winter arrived hard and stayed long, the months of scarcity began. Food reserves ran out. The landscape turned gray and silent. And in those frozen gardens, only one plant remained standing: Couve-Galega, Portuguese tree kale. Tall, fibrous, almost impossibly tough. Not pleasant to eat, not easy to chew, but alive when everything else was dead. Peasant women, working with what they had, developed something ingenious. They learned to shred the Couve-Galega leaves into razor-thin strips. So thin the tough fibers broke down almost instantly in boiling water. Tossed in at the very last moment, the leaves turned the water green and mineral-rich. It was hot. It filled the stomach. It kept people alive through the winter. But it was missing something. The broth was thin, watery. It lacked substance. The kind of substance that turns survival food into something that actually satisfies. That missing ingredient was about to arrive from the other side of the world, and it would take centuries, 2 empires, and one of the most significant ecological events in human history to get there. High in the Andes Mountains of what is now Peru and Bolivia, the Inca Empire had cultivated a remarkable crop for thousands of years. They grew it at altitudes above 3,000 meters, in conditions where almost no other food crop could survive. They freeze-dried it for storage. They traded it across their empire. They built an entire agricultural system around it, the potato. When Spanish and Portuguese explorers arrived in the Americas in the 16th century, they encountered this crop and brought it back to Europe. And Europe, almost universally, rejected it. For decades, in some countries, for over a century, Europeans viewed the potato with deep suspicion. It wasn't mentioned in the Bible. It grew underground, which seemed unnatural. Some believed it caused leprosy. Others dismissed it as animal feed, unfit for human consumption. In parts of France, it was illegal to grow. In northern Portugal, none of those objections mattered. Hunger left no room for prejudice. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the potato reached the smallholders of Minho, and something remarkable happened. The damp, acidic soil of northern Portugal, the same soil that made wheat cultivation so difficult, turned out to be almost perfectly suited for the Andean potato. It produced an astonishing number of calories in a tiny space, exactly what a minifúndio farmer needed. And when those farmers boiled the potato down and crushed it into a velvety emulsion with water and local olive oil, they discovered what the Minho winter had been waiting for all along. The thin green broth finally had a body, a depth, a richness that filled you from the inside. The creamy starch of an Andean crop, born 12,000 kilometers away, embraced the rugged fibers of a Portuguese winter plant. Two ingredients that had never shared a continent, brought together by exploration, trade, and the resourcefulness of people who simply needed to eat. Caldo Verde, exactly as it exists today, was born. And here is the number that puts this moment in perspective. Historians estimate that the introduction of the potato to Europe contributed to between 12 and 25% of the continent's entire population, growth between 1700 and 1900. And it accounts for 47% of the increase in urbanization during that same period, one crop, from the Andes. That changed how many people Europe could feed, how many could survive the winter, and how many could eventually leave the countryside and build cities. In Minho, it also changed what was in the bowl. As the 19th century brought internal migration and the slow growth of Portugal's cities, Caldo Verde descended from the northern hills and arrived on the 7 hills of Lisbon. In the rustic taverns of Alfama, in the late-night fado houses of Bairro Alto, in the working-class quarters where people ate after midnight when the day's work was finally done, the peasant soup of Minho became the city's ultimate comfort food. Simple, cheap, warming, unmistakably Portuguese. And then came the emigration. In the 20th century, waves of Portuguese families left for France, Germany, Brazil, Canada, the United States, for wherever work could be found. They packed what they could carry, and many of them packed something that most people would not have thought to bring. Couve-Galega seeds. In backyards in Newark and Pawtucket and Toronto. In gardens in Rio de Janeiro and Luxembourg. Those tall stalks of Portuguese tree kale grew in soil that had never seen them before. They were a living tether to the Minho, a taste of memory across oceans. Today, Caldo Verde is found wherever Portuguese communities have settled. It appears at weddings, at baptisms, at the Feast of St. Anthony in June, when Lisbon fills with music and the smell of grilled sardines. It is served at midnight. It is served at celebrations. It is, in every sense of the word, the soup that survived. And it is all of this because of a convergence that no one planned. A famine crop that wouldn't die, a potato from the Andes that Europeans didn't want, and the hunger of people in a rainy corner of northern Portugal who had no choice but to make something out of almost nothing. In 2011, Portugal voted, not for a politician, not for a policy, for food. The 7 wonders of Portuguese gastronomy were chosen by popular vote, and Caldo Verde was among them, a soup with no known inventor, no royal origin, no single moment of creation, just centuries of necessity, ingenuity, and the slow alchemy of 2 ingredients finding each other across an ocean. There is something quietly remarkable about the fact that one of Portugal's most celebrated cultural symbols is a peasant soup. Not a dish invented in a royal kitchen. Not something that required rare ingredients or specialist knowledge. Something that required almost nothing. And turned that almost nothing into something that has lasted 5 centuries and crossed every ocean Portuguese people have ever crossed. The Couve-Galega is still cut the same way. Rolled into a tight cylinder, sliced into razor-thin ribbons, added at the last moment. The potato still gives the broth its body. The olive oil still swirls across the surface. The Inca farmer who cultivated that potato at 3,000 meters above sea level never knew it would end up in a clay bowl in the Minho. The peasant woman who first shredded those tough kale leaves into boiling water never knew her method would travel to Newark and Rio de Janeiro. Food doesn't need to know where it's going. It just needs to survive long enough to get there. How do you take your Caldo Verde? Is it incomplete without a slice of broademillo on the side? Or do you hold out for that single round of smoky chorizo floating on the surface? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you have a memory attached to this soup, a grandmother's kitchen, a street festival, a bowl eaten somewhere far from home, I'd genuinely love to hear it. This is what Seven Hills Tales is for. Not just the history that's written in books, but the history that's still being carried, quietly, in seeds and recipes, and the things people bring with them when they leave. Until the next tale, keep the fire burning.